Uniting is a greater and more deserving art. An artist in uniting would be welcome in any profession the world over. That's a quote by Goethe. One way to unite a team is by using a shared mental model. You might think right away that using a shared mental model would mean that you're restricted. You might think, well, you have to work within certain boundaries. However, when you work on a team, you want your efforts to contribute to the team's success. Have you ever worked on a team that seems stuck? Raise your hands. Okay. Pretty frustrating, right? Perhaps it was because there was no shared mental model. Imagine for a moment that you are stranded on an island like Tom Hanks was in the movie Castaway. Is there anything you can do to increase your odds of surviving? In fact, research shows there is. If you can somehow adjust your mental model to reflect the new realities of your situation, that will greatly increase your chances. Turns out that is exactly what Tom Hanks did. At first, he kept trying to escape the island on a raft that he made, but the tides were too strong, he couldn't do it. He then got very wise, and he started plotting the behavior of the tides over different seasons. This became his mental model, and he ended up using this to then create a plan for escape, which helped him to escape. It worked. Research shows, a recent study showed that using a shared mental model for teamwork helped that team have better effectiveness and more creativity also. This study involved 161 teams that participated in a management simulation. It showed that in terms of intragroup conflict, when they had a shared mental model, that was really reduced. It showed that team performance was definitely improved, and they were a lot happier. They were just more satisfied. A shared mental model does provide some structure, and it provides a framework for how you're going to work together. There's two key ingredients that have to be present. You have to first clarify what the goals of the team are. It has to be very clear. And the second thing is, somehow you have to come up with norms of interacting. That's very important. When you succeed at this, then what can happen is new content can emerge on that team. Every person on that team, even if they're from various different disciplines, can introduce their own special skill set. This means that more methods and more approaches are available to that team, which will greatly enhance their chances of succeeding. This study showed that there were 4 types of conflict that you have to look out for. Task conflict, process conflict, relationship style differences, and temporal conflict. Temporal conflict is disagreements over the timing of certain events. What you have to do is get every team member to participate in goal setting and participate in decision making. Each and every person on that team must have their values and their interests honored by that team. That's very important. If you can accomplish these items, this will greatly minimize the task, process, and temporal conflict, and it's a lot less likely that relationship conflict will end up completely derailing your team. Now I'm going to share with you two examples of actual teams that did this, where they used a shared mental model to incredible results. The first example is about the Mars Pathfinder mission. This happened at NASA. The Mars Pathfinder was not their first set of missions to Mars. They had Viking that happened before this. What was different about it is that the Viking mission had $3 billion available for their missions. The Pathfinder missions, they had only $1 billion. That's a third less money. They realized that they were going to have to do things a different way, or this wasn't going to work. And there's three major things that they did that was different. They found a new way to work together. They found ways to share ideas and resources better. And the third thing is they made better use of prototypes. Now, I'm going to tell you all about those three, but first I just want to talk a little bit about the situation that they were in. They had to bring together many diverse specialists, a lot of different people from different disciplines, scientists, engineers. Each of these particular types of engineers even have their own approaches and methods. There's a lot of differences there. The thing is, not any one discipline or any one person had the skill to pull this off and make it happen. They had to work together. The program manager, Donna Shirley, spent a lot of time in the beginning building a team atmosphere and really working to make sure that each team member was invested in the ultimate outcome of the project, of landing this rover on Mars to investigate the surface of Mars. The systems engineer, Manning, wanted everyone to think like a systems engineer. Why? Because every single widget added money and complexity to the project. So he didn't want anything added that they could possibly eliminate. Now I want to tell you about these three key areas where they did things differently. The first is how they work together. They took a bold new approach to this. Co-location. Every team member lived in the same residence hall and worked in the same building. That gave them a lot of opportunities for interaction. They had a lot of things they had to hammer out, so they had to be able to engage in very in-depth dialogue and conversations to work all these different details out that had to be worked out if this was actually to happen. And this brings me to the second key difference, which had to do with their better sharing of ideas and resources. I'll give you an example. There was a question about what type of solar cells they should use. The flight system engineer, Brian Muirhead, wanted to use the more powerful gallium arsenate cells. They were better, but he didn't have money in his budget to do it. What ended up happening is that the ground data systems engineer, Al Sachs, ended up donating part of his budget to this because he cared about the project as a whole. He did it. This was amazing. This brings me to the third thing they did differently, which had to do with the way NASA as an organization related to this team on this project. Normally, NASA would require that every team member thoroughly document every step of everything that they did. But this time they loosened up their requirements and allowed them instead the freedom to experiment with prototypes. Think about this for a moment. When NASA sent a ship to the moon, they had the lunar module came out, it landed very methodically on the moon, and then the little car came out, the rover, It all happened very systematically and very methodically. Well, in this case, they did not have the money to be able to do it that way. They had to be creative. What they ended up doing is putting this rover, this little car, enveloping it in airbags. So they took this ship that got it almost all the way to Mars from the Earth, and then it would drop out and bounce like a ball on the surface of Mars. The key was it couldn't disintegrate in the process, or it wouldn't do them any good. It would be no point to go all that way and then not be able to succeed after all. So what they did is they had to test prototypes to over and over until they got one to work. And what this was about was taking a rover, kind of like a Volkswagen, dropping it from 100 feet at 60 miles an hour and propelling it off this giant platform at a 60-degree angle. They did this over and over until it didn't break apart, until it actually worked. In the end, this project was a huge success. The Mars Pathfinder missions were a success. The key to their success was the fact that this team used a shared mental model. My second story has to do with how the United States invented radar, or how they actually got it to work in World War II. This involved wave physicists and radio engineers, two totally separate groups of researchers who did not normally talk to each other. In fact, there were people that knew about both fields that would translate between the two groups. That's how they usually talked. But this was very time-consuming. This need in World War II was urgent, so they had to find a new way to do it because that wasn't going to work. It was taking too long. Neither the wave physicists nor the radio engineers had any idea how to create the actual device, the radio sets, physical device. And without that, they had nothing. What happened was that a large team of wave physicists and a large team of radio engineers all came together at the MIT Rad Lab. At first, they were on separate floors. They each had their own separate cubicle. They didn't get anywhere. Nothing was really happening. So they made some changes. They restructured the layout. They brought all the physicists, wave physicists, and the radio engineers together in one or two rooms. Now they really were working together, and they were very focused on coming up with components for this physical device. That was another thing that was crucial to their work. Normally what they would do is listen to each other's presentations, which did not go into enough detail, or they would write papers and read each other's papers that didn't go into enough detail. It wouldn't get them together anyway. Because they were so driven, they ended up working together. Something miraculous then happened. They developed a common language. This was their shared mental model. Because of this common language, they were able to actually produce the radio sets and actually produce working radar, which was really critical to the United States in World War II. Research shows that using a shared mental model greatly improves a team's performance. Today I gave you two actual examples that demonstrated using a shared mental model. The first example was about getting a rover, a little car, all the way to Mars to go around and investigate the surface of Mars and collect rock samples. The second example was about how wave physicists and radio engineers got together during World War II and created working radar, which helped win World War II. was Goethe who said, "Uniting is a greater and more deserving art."